Okay, can you guys, all right, good afternoon. This is Brooke. I'm hoping that you guys can hear me. I'm the project manager for the Collister concept study. Before I get started, I want to say thank you for your patience. The internet just went down in the building, and so we had to reconnect. Can you hold for just 1 second?
Oh, how about now? Can you guys hear us?
Can you guys hear us now? All right. This is our day. So with that being said, welcome to the Collister concept. This is our virtual open house. There's 2 of them this evening, but before we delve a little bit deeper into the concepts themselves, I would like us to take a moment to go primarily more of how you guys are going to communicate and give us feedback through this process, but also talk a little bit about some ground rules. So as we dig into this, there are so many ways in which you can participate in providing us feedback, one of them being highlighted there at the top of your screen. So if you go to where it says go to www.menti.com, the code is listed there, 32340782. You certainly are going to be able to participate and provide some feedback to us in our innovative approach at the end of this. It's also there located in the chat. Although there are other ways in which you can communicate, so I'll just quickly go over those. You certainly can leverage the chat as a mechanism to give us some feedback. While I recognize you're going to be giving us feedback through there, just be wary that it'll, my teammates here are going to help respond to those. The other part is our Q&A, so you can ask questions through the Q&A, and I will go through and answer those. And then lastly, raise your hand, and so you can see that there on your screen. There are 3 dots in the square box you can see over on the left-hand side at the bottom. Your device might be a little bit different. You certainly can log on to press on those little 3 dots. They'll give you some options on how you guys can log on and give some feedback. But before we go any further, I do want to just set a few ground rules. While I recognize that what you're going to be seeing today are several concepts, these are very high-level concepts, and I know there's a lot of passion involved in this project, and especially for those who reside on the street and those who use it. And so while we go through this process, I do ask that you take each other's comments into consideration, but you also respect everybody's comments. And so while I recognize passions may get high, I do ask that you refrain from putting anything that may not necessarily be appropriate in the chat box or responding to your neighbors, because let's not forget, these are still your neighbors at the end of the day. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and move into the project itself, kind of talk about how we got where we're at, and then our next steps moving forward. So today's Collister concept is all about us just going over a couple options. This is not the first time you guys have had an opportunity to review these. We did release these to the public in a survey that went live about a week ago. And we wanted to encourage you guys to get in there and take a look at the story map and provide some feedback, and several of you already have. However, we're going to go a little bit through them today, encourage you to give us some additional feedback. In addition to that, I want to talk about how we got here as it pertains to just the public. And so while I've spoken with many of you on the phone, some of you I've actually come out and visited on your street, on your doorstep, I know that there's going to be several more questions asked. And so if you don't want to ask them in the chat or you don't want to provide them in the survey, I want to encourage you to go to projects@achdidaho.org, and you can see that link there. Go ahead and send me a message, and we will get to those here in the next week as they start to roll in. But I do want to encourage you to reach out to me. In addition to that, you can contact me at 208-387-6318. I'd be happy to have any discussions regarding this project. Next. So when we first started this, I came out to the neighborhood, it was a couple months ago, and met with several of you guys, and did provide some feedback and did facilitate you guys in that conversation in an earlier virtual open house regarding what is important to you. And really the most important takeaway is this is your neighborhood, it is our job to find a vision. And so I want to go over quickly what we heard from you. So we have got several of you guys who've participated in this. 94 of you have given us comments in the past. Several of you were residents, but really what's important here is how you guys all navigated through here and what was important to you as it pertained to the street, whether it be walking or biking or taking the bus. And so you're going to see a lot of those feedbacks and those comments there. But it's what we did with your information that helped us get to where we're at today with the concept. And so we heard from several of you, what are your preferred options? What would you like to see? Up here on the slide before you is all the preferred options and how 194 of you who participated in the surveys, how that fell out. 112 of you did say that sidewalks are important and you'd like to be able to navigate those streets on a safe sidewalk. Several of you highlighted speed bumps that were an option. But 14 of you did come back and say leaving it as it is not an option. But you flipped that over to the least preferred option that we heard from you, and we heard 121 of you said you can't leave it alone. Please come in here and do something. And that's why we're here today is we want to walk through what we could potentially do to create an environment for you guys to comfortably navigate the street on your bikes and peds. In addition, address some of the speeds in the, that some folks have highlighted as a concern. So moving along, if we could just go through a couple of things that you're going to see through this concept and what we did consider. The RRSB was our number one that you're going to see as options throughout all these concepts, as well as the addition of bulb outs. In addition to that, we did have a couple things that we took off the list, and we took these off the list for several reasons, and I'll go over two of them in particular. So we had both chicanes and speed bumps that were removed. Chicanes we removed because while we recognize that they are a traffic calming tool, for this particular street, they're not necessarily appropriate. And primarily it's because of the number of driveways throughout all of Collister. In addition to that, we removed speed bumps off of the list because, again, the number of speed bumps that we would have to actually put in place would be pretty disruptive to the neighborhood and those who reside on it. And so it is an option we did take off the list. However, we're going to delve into a little bit of what we did consider. So what you're going to see next are three concepts, and I'm going to take you through each one of those. I'm going to talk about what's going to be on the west side, what's going to be on the east side. In addition to that, I'm going to talk about what you can anticipate in the projects themselves. I want to highlight there are two projects, certainly, that are fairly large. Our footprint is pretty expansive. Concept 1 is one of them, as well as concept 3. And I'll go over to the pros and the cons of about both of those. Before I do that, however, let's just talk about concept 1 that is before you. So on the west side, you've got bulb outs that are going to be applied throughout the corridor itself. You have on-street parking. You see a buffered bike lane as an option for the cyclists. And then you see the RRSB that is going to be put in place both at North State Street as well as John's Landing. What you also notice is what's on the east side. You're going to notice that on the east side that we actually had to remove parking to be able to accommodate the additional pedestrian facilities. We had a 7-foot sidewalk, a raised bike lane. So between the raised bike lane as well as the sidewalk, it's important to note there is a vertical element. In addition to that, the RFB crossings at North State Street and John's Landing. Both of these options and all three options as we move forward do require us to consider the removal of parking on that east side. And I want to speak really brief to why that was the decision on which we made. Much of your attractors are on the east side. You have got the school, you've got the park, you have the library, and you have the business there at the southern segment of Collister. And so while we recognize the value of having parking on both sides, for us to accommodate pedestrian facilities, we did have to look to consolidating that parking to one side. And as a result, it made sense in which to move it to the west side, because on the east side you had all the attractors that you were trying to get to. In this segment that you see before you, I do want to highlight that you have the option outside of today's meeting, and I'm not going to go through them slide by slide, but I want to encourage you outside of today's meeting to actually scroll through these aerial visuals. There's 3 pages there at the bottom. You could click and go through each one. And I want to encourage you to do that on your own time, because certainly if you are a resident who reside on Collister, you're going to narrow right into your home, and that's perfectly fine. So we want you to take a look at that. So I'm only going to speak to these segments at high level, and what I'm going to call out is actually what we call our pedestrian level of traffic stress, as well as our bicycle level of traffic stress. And for some folks, you may not have any idea what that means. So a quick little story on how we came here. ACHD wants to provide an environment that is comfortable for everyone to navigate our streets, whether it be on a bike or walking. And so we took into this account, it's called our level of traffic stress. It's an analysis that we do to look at a roadway, and our goal is to find our level of traffic stress for bikes and peds to be at 1 and 2. And so in this concept that you see before you, we are attaining that level of traffic stress of a 2 and a 2. So bikes and peds can comfortably navigate through this space, in our opinion, at a level of traffic stress 2, which is comfortable for all ages. So moving into the next space. And this one, I think, is actually a really great way to showcase what does this look like. And so you're going to see it before, and then as we scroll across, you're going to see what it looks like should we apply that concept on your road. Something to note, however, while you're looking at this application of this concept, you're going to see the on-street parking, the buffered bike lanes, the vehicle travel lanes, which we have reduced in width to 10.5 feet, raised bike lane and a sidewalk. But what you may not necessarily see is for us to attain this footprint on Collister as it is today, we are going to have to move both that fence as well as those utility poles. This is one of our largest footprints. And so while this does provide for all types of folks navigating on the east and west side, it does require the expansion of the road itself for bikes and peds. While the travel lanes are reduced, the footprint is certainly larger. And one of those trade-offs, and I want to speak to some of the benefits and some of the challenges with this. So while we are providing for bikes and peds on both sides, there are some challenges, and I want to go over each one of those with you. So in this case, the pedestrians are limited to one side of the road. So the sidewalks, folks who are wanting to navigate on feet, you only have sidewalks on one side. There is that removal of parking on one side, which I mentioned to you earlier. In addition, should we find ourselves ever having to do construction on that east side where that sidewalk is located, pedestrians are going to have to be detoured, and we're going to have to use a traffic detour company to provide for that safe access. And so that is a challenge, because oftentimes if we had sidewalk on the other side, we can move pedestrians across the street. In this case, we don't necessarily have that facility, so we would have to make those accommodations. But more importantly, one of the things I heard when we came out there earlier this year and after I visited with neighbors along the street, your tree canopy is so important. And so while I recognize this 50-foot cross-section will provide options for everyone on east and west side, the limitations and the challenges, there is potential that is going to have a tree impact. And that tree impact, dependent on where we are within this corridor, could be pretty significant. I want to bring that up into some full transparency as we look to this. A week ago, we did go out with a tree forester. We did walk the street, and we did look at that. And so while we recognize this footprint is fairly large and it provides for all options, we also recognize the limitation and our desire to ensure that we keep that tree maturity canopy throughout Collister. And so we took note of that. And again, we're here today just as a high level, here are some concepts, give us some feedback, but it doesn't mean we're not going to go back to the drawing table and look to figure out how to mitigate that issue. So moving on to concept number 2. So concept number 2 is actually our smallest footprint. You're going to see here where we just have, again, parking on the west side. You have 2 travel lanes down to 10.5 feet. In addition to that, you have that 3-foot buffer, that multi-use pathway is at 11 feet. This is the smallest footprint, approximately 42 feet, and this does provide for bikes and peds to navigate all of Collister, ensuring that you do have a level of comfort. On the east side, we'll just quickly talk to the east side before I move on to the next slide. On the east side, same thing applies as it does to concept when we're going to have build-outs throughout the whole corridor to ensure that we do allow that facilitation of folks crossing the street. Again, that multi-use pathway. There are no pedestrian facilities on the west side, so that is a big difference here. However, it is the smallest footprint. So let's move on to the aerials, and I'll give you a quick little peek at what those look like. Again, I want to encourage you, take a look at this. Again, you've got those 3 slides there at the bottom. It'll allow you to take a look and see maybe how this would actually be right outside your doorstep. So definitely want to encourage you to log on there and take a look. But back to that level of traffic stress, bikes and peds. This does provide for a level 1 and 2, so a level 2 for pedestrians and a level 1 for cyclists, enabling them to feel comfortable for all users to be able to navigate all of Collister. And again, to that footprint, it is 45 feet, so it is significantly the smallest of all of them. So moving on to the next slider, I'm going to highlight what that potentially could look like should I apply it to your street. In this case, so you have got the before, and then as we slide it, you're going to get a little glimpse of what that potentially could look like. Again, it's on-street parking on the west side, the vehicle travel lane reduced to 10.5 feet to that buffer space, which in this case is depicted as stamped concrete, and then that multi-use pathway. At 45 feet, this impact is significantly less. The challenges as well, a few of the challenges still exist, and I'll go over those here in a moment. So we have got pedestrians limited to one side of the road, on-street parking again limited to one side of the road. We do have no pedestrian facilities on the west, therefore, should we find ourselves in construction, again, we're going to have to seek that detour. But before I move off this slide and we move on to the next concept, I do want to highlight one segment, and so if we can go back up to the benefits. On this one in particular, being that it is the smallest pathway, the smallest footprint, there are key RFBs that I may have highlighted in the first one, but I really want to highlight them on this one as well. The RFBs are located at John's Landing, and I'll highlight John's Landing in the next concept, why that is so important. But we do want to facilitate folks navigating on bikes throughout this corridor, and that RFB at John's Landing is going to really help us ensure that we can do that on an existing bikeway. So if we can move on to concept 3. And this is the last of the concepts that we have before you in which to consider. Again, this one is significantly larger than the one we just showed you. 1 and 3 have the largest footprints. In this case, it's every imaginable pedestrian facility you can think of, right? We've got the multi-use pathway there on the east side, the sidewalk on the west side, parking limited to the west side, the travel lanes certainly are reduced, and then we have that buffered space. While I recognize this is your largest footprint, it is taking everything, and if you were to imagine the perfect place in which to provide for bikes and peds, oftentimes this would be that reflection. However, there are limitations, and those are really important. But it's also what we do in one segment of Collister that I want to highlight here. If we can scroll down a little bit. Let's see if it'll come up. It's what we do in the center segment of this. So it's from Catalpa Drive to John's Way. This segment is a little bit different than the other portions of Collister, and I want to highlight this. Back to that point about John's Landing Way, and I highlighted that RFB of being important, and it's because at John's Landing we have what's called a bikeway, the bikeway that comes out onto Collister. And it does continue down Collister, and then you can turn and go on Catalpa. We want to help facilitate the safest way in which folks can navigate Collister to get to Catalpa on that existing bikeway. So through this segment from Catalpa to John's Landing, on the west side, there are very few front-on housing. And as a result, we do have an opportunity to leverage that space a little bit more, so that way we could have that multi-use pathway to help facilitate that movement of folks coming on the John's Landing bikeway down Collister and onto Catalpa. This multi-use pathway is reflected here, and this is only for that small segment. If we can move on. And there was a chat that came out if we're going to show you the aerial. Yes, we do have an aerial on this segment as well. Want to encourage you, we're not going to flip through each one of these, but do want to encourage you on your own time to go and take a look at that, see how it looks like in front of your house. To the level of traffic stress that I've highlighted, this concept does provide for the highest rating for level of traffic stress, partly because we have pedestrian facilities on both sides. So being pedestrian facilities on the east and west allows us to attain that 1, as well as the bicycle level of traffic stress that allows us to attain that 1 as well. But back to that point, 1 and 3 has the largest footprint. This one is at 51.5 feet. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down and show you what that looks like once we apply it to your streets. So what you've got here is the visual, the before, and then once we were to take that concept and lay it out, what does that look like? So in this case, you have that sidewalk there on the west side. You still have that, maintain that on-street parking. We have those vehicle travel lanes reduced to 10.5, that buffer again at 3 feet in that multi-use pathway. While I recognize this does provide for all pedestrians on the east and west side, there are some limitations to this, and I want to go over some of those challenges. The challenges are really going to highlight what this is going to potentially impact or disrupt in the neighborhood. So again, back to that point, we are looking at on-street removal on the west side, as well as on-street removal for that one segment between John's Landing and Catawba. Again, this does have the highest, the biggest footprint, and as a result would have significant tree impact. And I call that out because it's important as we move forward with these concepts that we recognize the trade-off. We could have all the pedestrian facilities on east and west side, while, however, there's that potential that we're going to have that disruption to that mature tree canopy. And to my point, and to our earlier conversations when we had a virtual open house, I recognize the desire to ensure that we have that mature tree canopy throughout Collister. And as I highlighted earlier, we are going to go back to the table and take all of these ideas, and we're going to reevaluate them and hopefully be back before you guys this coming spring to look at some options that may take all of this into account while also maintaining as much of those trees as we can. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and move on to the next slide. And that is kind of where we go from here. So this is our second virtual open house, however, it's not our last. This is our second time coming to you to solicit feedback for these concepts. These are very high-level concepts. While we recognize that the end result may not be one of these concepts you see before you this evening, it's important that we find out which ones you did like. By being able to participate in a survey, by being able to participate in this evening's meeting, and by giving us your feedback, it allows us to go back to the drawing table to find a solution that really does go back to what we discussed at our first virtual open house, which is what is the vision for your community, what is your vision for your neighborhood, and how are we going to attain all of that while providing safe access for folks to navigate that street, both on bikes and peds. So while I'm here before you today, we will be back out again this coming spring. The idea is to come back to you with some options, and it doesn't mean that that's going to be the last time we come out to you. We're going to come out to you until we have this right. And it's important that we get your participation, that you guys provide us your feedback to ensure that whatever solution we bring to the neighborhood is one that you will appreciate and one that will meet the needs of your community. With that being said, this does conclude our formal presentation. I think this is a great time to start that discussion. We're going to move on into the surveys. So back to what I highlighted on that second slide. How can I participate and provide some feedback? Log on to www.menti.com if you haven't already done so. The code is 32340782. And I'm going to pause and allow you guys an opportunity to get logged in, because the next thing we're going to do in the next phase of today's presentation, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and we want your feedback. Your feedback, like I said, is going to help us make a determination of what's appropriate for your street and help us whittle down the appropriate concept that's going to meet your guys' needs. This is, and I have to reiterate, this is your street. You are the neighborhoods on this street, and these are your neighbors, so please be respectful as we go through this as well. So I'll pause just for a moment, and we will open it up for discussion. Does the Menti thing fire up at some point? Pat, I'm going to have somebody here who understands that a little bit better respond to your message in chat.
Yeah, so just real quick, if you go to www.menti.com. Oh, okay, so I see your comment, Pat. So what will happen next is as we start going through this Menti presentation, your screen will change, and so you'll have access to answer some of our questions.
Good question. All right. We'll give it maybe a half a minute more, give you guys an opportunity to log on. Give me an opportunity to have a cup of coffee. All right, I think we gave you guys plenty of time to log on, so let's just move into the second phase of tonight's presentation. So you're going to see these again, but now we're going to ask you a series of questions. So as it pertains to Collister Drive concept number 1, footprint being 51 feet, parking on one side, bike lanes, the travel lanes, the raised bike lane, and the sidewalk, we'd love to hear what your insight is. So to the next slide. Please explain what you like or dislike about concept 1. We'll start reading them off as they come through. And they should start populating when you guys give us some feedback. All right. Car doors opening on bikers due to the narrow traffic lanes. We've got travel, I can't see under that one, but bike lanes don't help pedestrians. Let's continue on and keep those comments coming. Any more comments? We'll give it a few more seconds. All right, with that being said, we're going to move on to the second question. And guys, if you're there, I'd love to encourage you to give us, oh, here we go. All concepts, wide lanes are so narrow. Generally, like sidewalks on each side is good. Separation of the bikes and heads is important. I do want to talk to the comment just in general because it's for all of them, the concepts of why lanes are so narrow. Actually, the travel lanes going down to 10.5 feet have a second purpose, which will actually slow vehicles down, which speeds on Collister was actually highlighted as one of the biggest concerns that folks have expressed. From the previous surveys, the desire was 5-to-1 for pedestrian improvements via bike. This concept is bike focused and not pedestrian focused. Thank you for your feedback. Generally, like sidewalks on the east side is good. Back to that point about separating our bikes and pedestrians. All right, well, we'll go ahead and jump into the second question. So, Collister Drive concept 2, back to that same point. Love to hear your guys' insights. What is it that you liked or disliked about this particular project? Okay. All right, and just to quickly go over what we're looking for concept 2, this is that parking as on one side, 10.5-foot travel lanes, the buffer, the multi-use pathway. This is the smallest of the concepts at 45 feet, so while you're thinking of giving us some feedback, what you like or dislike, I thought maybe I'd speak to it a little bit as if you guys are putting in some insight. Not much shifts entire burden to the east side. Most trees are saved. That is certainly the case in this one. This does, this does stay within, I can't say necessarily the existing footprint the whole way because there's so much variability, but it is the smallest footprint. Similar concerns about the narrow traffic lanes, and does it connect existing sidewalks? See if there's any more feedback. How will you encourage bikes to use the multi-use side? Visually narrow to calm traffic, keeps the tree canopy, the most used bike ped area of the city is the green belt and the multi-use pathway. And then the walking path gives plenty of room for pedestrians without the sidewalk. And I do want to highlight, as you guys are giving us your feedback, we are capturing these and we will be taking them back to the team as we make determination moving forward. So again, thanks for your concepts. These are valuable to many of your points. You do certainly like the wide sidewalk. Yes, it's certainly significantly larger at 11 feet, with, in addition to that, a 3-foot buffer. So there's a lot of comfort there. I like the wide multi-use pathway. I like the single-sided sidewalk where you can walk both ways. Feels like the green belt. Will all these concepts maintain the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit? That is the existing speed limit along Collister, and that will stay the same. while at the same time, the narrow travel lanes and some of the other types of facility treatments in which we add to this will have that traffic calming effect. And so while we recognize that the speed limit is what it's set at, in addition to those, by being able to put some elements into the vehicle, in this corridor itself, we are looking at that traffic calming. So moving on to the last concept, this is concept number 3. This is one of the largest footprints at 51.5 feet. It does have a sidewalk on one side. It's got that parking lane, 10.5-foot travel lanes. It does have that 3-foot buffer, in addition to that multi-use pathway. So while this is the largest footprint, it does provide for bikes and pedestrians on both sides, east and west, although there are those trade-offs in which we discussed earlier. Love to jump into the question and get your guys' feedback. Again, please take an opportunity right here and give us what you like or dislike about concept 3. I'll give you a second to populate that. Do not like how this will have the largest impact on your mature trees. As one of the largest footprints, that is, yes, that is the case. I like the buffer between the road and the multi-use pathway. That's certainly, and for us to meet our LTS guidelines that we've established at ACHD, which is those performance measures for bikes and peds, when we look to providing for all users, that buffer is actually a new addition to our multi-use pathways to ensure that extra level of comfort. This is somebody's least preferred option of 3 concepts. There's a highlight that it does accommodate pedestrians on both sides. Bulb outs on Jan's Landing is concerning given how currently used and lack of visibility, cars may run head to head as they sneak out. And actually, that's a really good point. And so we are well aware of that location at John's Landing, that sight triangle of folks having to pull out further ahead so they can see that traffic coming down Collister. Just be aware that we do know that that is an issue and is something we will be looking into as we move this project forward. This is a nice concept for the bike boulevard in the center section. The north and south section would be concept 2, while this is the filler in the middle. Very good suggestion. The taking out of all the trees is terrible. That is one of the things that gives Collister its beauty. Yes, and it is one of the things that we heard is really, really important, both to the neighborhoods reside there and those who actually navigate this space. So while we hear that the trees are important, we are taking that into consideration. That is why we're going back out a second time. We are including the tree forester to help us make a determination what's appropriate treatment that moves forward while maintaining that mature tree canopy. Best of 3 concepts, new trees can be replanted to replace the older ones. Like the new sidewalk on the north side of John's Landing, helps kids get to the school bus safely. Will speed limit remain the same? Yes, the speed limit is not going to change. While we're doing all these treatment options into Collister, these treatment options that we are putting in, back to that point, the goal is to provide that traffic calming throughout Collister. While we're not reducing the speed limits, we are doing other additional facility treatments that would help ensure that that is a possibility. So moving on to our next question. This did wrap up our likes or dislikes. However, we want to get an idea of what you guys think of each one of the concepts. So which of the 3 concepts presented for Collister Drive do you prefer overall? Concept 1, concept 2, or you don't like any of them? All right, so it looks as though we have got concept 3 winning out at 71%. All right, we've got some people changing. So we've got concept 1 at 13%, concept 2 at 25%, and concept 3 at 63%. So thank you guys so much for your feedback. Moving on to the next question. Please elaborate on why you prefer one concept over the other. And I'm really curious, love to hear your feedback about 2 and 3. So several of you came out highly preferred concept number 3. Would love to find out why that's the case. So if you could give us some feedback here, that would be really grateful. All right, we'll give it a moment to Capture your thoughts. This is a great place for us to hear what you guys are thinking. You just type them in. All right. Like that there are sidewalks on both sides, avoids folks continuing to walk in traffic and having to bounce back and forth, lots of room for pedestrians. Concept 3 provides the most flexibility for bikes and peds. 3 divides the bike traffic from the pedestrians. I bike both directions regularly, as well as I drive. I always feel safe now, but if you're going to do it right. We could keep most of the tree canopy with Concept 2 on the north and south sections, while implementing Concept 3 from John's Landing to Catalpa. This is already a large footprint. Yes, that is a very large footprint. I like the smallest footprint option. However, I do also like having sidewalks on both sides. I like both options 2 or 3 and be happy with either. Although it's unfortunate that Concept 3 is the widest, I like it because it provides the most accommodations for connecting the neighborhood and the safety. Thank you for your feedback. This is all important as we move forward. All right, and let's jump in. Oh, Concept 2 provides the bikes and ped access safely. The sidewalks on both sides is not necessary. Thank you for your feedback. We'll give it one more second, see if anybody else wants to add anything. All right, let's just jump into the next question. Is there anything we missed or special considerations we should take into account? So while I recognize we had lots of questions, we want to hear from you. Is there something else? Is there another idea you'd like us to approach? Well, I said earlier, this is a very high-level discussion. There's a lot on the table and a lot to unpack. We'd like for you guys to give us an idea of what was so important and what did you appreciate. And then as we move into this next iteration of these concepts, we're going to take all that back to the drawing table. So is there anything else, considerations that you guys would like us to hear? This is the time to tell us. North sight line is blocked by parking at the Collister cul-de-sac. Thank you. That's good feedback. If you guys reside on this street or you travel this street, tell us those things. This is an important opportunity for you guys to tell us through your lens how the street impacts how you navigate and what that looks like, and if there's something else we're not taking into consideration. While I realize that part of the project, some concepts may merge better with Hill Road, given we do not know at this point if it could change perspective. Yes, that is a very good observation. Give you guys a moment to keep adding to it. The utility lot north of John's Landing needs to make sure the foliage is kept trim and also prevent people from using the area about the bus stop as a park and ride. Again, that is very good observation I wasn't aware of. When turning out of my driveway, some of the large trees block my view. How will this be taken into consideration now that there will be sidewalks with regular pedestrians? Yes, that is something, just as you navigate through several of Ada County streets and you do come across sidewalks, you're just going to have to take that into account. Sidewalks on many of our residential streets is actually standard practice. And so while you're coming out of the driveway, it just had to be something and you have to take into account moving forward. Consider how the existing sidewalk and bike lane will be integrated at State Street. Very important, as we know that there's that greenbelt attractor down there. Street parking can limit visuals when entering Collister from Castle Bar. Good point. Please let us know if sidewalks will be continuously flat or up down like the north side of Catalpa. And I'm going to speak to that briefly. You're speaking primarily to driveways. And if that's the case, that's certainly something we would take into consideration and address. Would be nice to have a crossing near the Good Samaritan facility. Thank you. Collister is on a street like Catalpa. It looks like it may be more dangerous. We certainly have significantly more volumes and speeds down Collister than Catalpa, yes. Any more feedback, comments, or anything else you'd like us to take into consideration? All right. And I think we just have one more question. Please share any additional comments you have about this project. We're going to capture them here. So this is the time for us to take any last-minute feedback, anything that you would suggest to us. While you recognize in the previous question how it pertained to the street itself, this is an opportunity for us to hear from you about how we're communicating, if we're communicating appropriately, if you need to hear more from us, or if there's neighbors along the street you need us to discuss. I want to encourage you to send me an email or contact me at that phone number listed. I'd be happy to talk to folks as it pertains to this street. We'll give you a moment to give us some questions. When will this project be started and finished? So right now we're in what's called concept phase, and that's a really good question. And so the concept really allows us to get out to the neighborhood, talk to you, find out what your vision is for your street, and to vet several options. This process usually will take about a year, and we're about half a year into this already. This coming spring, it's our intent to come back to you with an additional concept. Well, will it be the perfect one? We're not certain yet, and so we want to leave that open, that option open, that we continue to communicate. The goal is to have this project adopted this coming summer or early next fall, depending on the timeline. And should we get this adopted, usually a project will go into design year, which is an additional year where we still come back out there, but that's where we talk about more of the technical elements. That's where we dig in a little bit deeper about potentially what some of the treatment options could be like on your street, and we'll come back out a second time. That design year can take up to a full year. So now we're out 2. So next year will be 2022. If we were to go straight into design, and that design and adoption is at commission directive. So it could be 22, we adopt, 23, a design year. We do reserve a year in case we have to have right-of-way. That we're not certain if that's going to be the case. That could take another year, so we're at 24, and a construction can certainly take a year, so it's at 25. That is the standard timeline for several of our projects at ACHD, especially projects of this magnitude, and so that there is some variable to that. But more importantly, while the staff makes this recommendation and the staff puts this together, ultimate decision lies with your elected officials and with the commissioners. And so the commissioners are the ones who make a determination if a project is adopted, if it does move forward, and ultimately what that timeline potentially could look like. So while we're putting all these recommendations forward, do recognize there are several variables that could influence the timeline or the completion schedule. Will any of the options require stormwater drainage improvements or roadway resurfacing? All of them. We are coming in and reevaluating that whole street, curb, gutter, sidewalks. All of those things have potential impacts on stormwater. And actually, to that point, when we did our initial outreach, we did hear from several neighbors that stormwater is a concern. And while we have gone out to mitigate it in the past, it doesn't discount the fact that we're going to have to do it here as well. So while all concepts move forward, stormwater drainage will be part of our design as well as our construction as we move the project into completion. Which side of the street will ACHD take additional property if proposal exceeds 50-foot right-of-way? That is not even, at this point, I couldn't necessarily tell you east or west side, or if right-of-way is going to be a consideration. It is our goal to bring a concept back to you that takes all of these comments, everything into account. These are large footprints. We have 51.5 feet, and then we have an additional one. So I can't necessarily tell you if it's going to be the east or west side. I can't even tell you if those are going to be the options that move forward. And so because of the variability throughout Collister, it's important that we keep all options on the table, but also recognize there's some limitations. And it's going to be us working with you to figure out the right solution for your street. What happens to driveway, landscaping, and people yards? Sidewalks or parking will now be there. Will there be assistance to improve residential driveways for consistency? Yes, part of the installation of a new sidewalk or multi-use pathway or whatever treatment we move forward, we are going to have to take into account those driveway approaches and those aprons, and those will be part of our project as we move forward into design, all of those things will be taken into account. But back to the point, we have to find a concept first that is going to meet bikes and peds as well as vehicles moving through this corridor, and so all of those things will be taken care of in design, but we got to get through concept first, and we're going to keep coming back out to you until we get it right. Any more comments? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat box that I may have missed. We'll take a moment to look and see if there's anything in the Q&A. All right. With that being said, there were several comments, several ways in which you guys can participate in providing feedback. We do have one more question after this, or I think this wraps it up. Yep. So it's now open questions. I hope I was able to answer several of them. I recognize that you guys took this time out of your day to come and visit with us. And I know also how important this is to your street. This is your neighborhood. Several of you may actually be residents along this neighborhood. And so while we go through this next phase, it's important that you continue to communicate with me and reach out to me. And I'm more than happy to engage over the phone, in person, or via email. So while we go through this process, there's a lot that's going to have to be unpacked. And quite frankly, we're not necessarily going to have the right answer as of today, based off of what we've gone back to look at. When we look at these concepts and how they're applied on the street, we know we're going to have to do some more digging, and we're going to have to do some more conceptual drawings to get it right. And so I'll be back before you this coming spring, and when I do come back, I'm hoping that we will have narrowed down a concept that would probably meet the needs of those who reside on the street as well as those who navigate it. If there aren't any other questions, I can't tell if this is a question or if this is just some feedback. Okay, I think it was just a technical feedback regarding some construction easements. All right, well, again, if you have any questions, the email's located there on the website. You can go to our landing page, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. It's a privilege to go out and visit with the neighborhood, and more importantly, to engage in this conversation. It is your street, and I look forward to working with all of you guys in creating an environment for all of you. So thank you so much. You guys take care, and happy holidays.